The downside to agreeableness, as far as I can tell, is that it's over-concerned with the establishment of, or the maintenance of peace in the present, and under-concerned with the establishment of peace in the future. And I think that's what conscientiousness does instead. So my idea, and I have no idea if this is correct, by the way, but so I'm moving out towards the fringes of knowledge on personality, but I think what happened, it's hard to get conscientiousness out of animals. You know, like most things you can develop an animal model for, right? Conscientiousness, that's a tough one. We haven't been able to come up with a reasonable animal model, or a neuropsychological model, or a psychopharmacological model, or a theoretical model, or a cognitive model. Like, the things we don't know about conscientiousness are manifold. But anyways, I think what's happened is that agreeableness is a good heuristic for establishing harmonious egalitarianism in very small groups. So, you know, if you're in a family, and you have parents, because generally, if you're in a family, you do, you know, one of the concerns about the parents is that resources are fairly distributed. You know, and generally parents are loath to really produce much of a dominance hierarchy in terms of affection in relationship to their children, right? It seems kind of like a violation of the parental contract. So, but then the question is, what happens when you enter into bigger organizations where familial ties either can't be maintained merely because of the size of the organization, or because the organization is just too complex to be run that way? I think that's when conscientiousness kicks in. And conscientiousness is more of a cold virtue. It's not exactly based, as far as we can tell, it's not based in any social emotion. It's more like, here are the articulated rules whereby the social organization functions. I'm going to adhere to those and follow them, and that's what makes me conscientious. Now, there's an orderly part, and that would be absence of rule breaking and keeping things in their proper position. And then there's an industriousness element, which also seems to have something to do with keeping social norms. Like, although there's an element of going for the ideal instead of just not breaking rules in industriousness. Conservative people are more conscientious than liberal people. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because conscientiousness is concerned with the maintenance of current social rules and then playing the game according to the rules. Liberals are higher in openness and lower in conscientiousness, so they're more likely to transform the rules, which is something conservatives don't really like, because they're doing fine playing the current game, you know. And there's some real utility in maintaining the current game, because if it's too unstable, then you have a descent into chaos, and that's not good for anybody. Okay, so back to agreeableness. Now, so the big difference between men and women in terms of traits seems to be, so you could put, first of all, I should show you, let's see if I got this here. Yeah. So there's two overlapping normal distributions, okay, and the blue ones are women and the red ones are men. And the blue is agreeableness. Like, the blue is shifted over to the more agreeable side, and the red is shifted over to the less agreeable side. The first thing that you should notice about that isn't that the differences exist. The first thing that you should notice is that almost all of the territory is overlapped. And so what that means is that if you took men and women, if you drew men and women randomly from the population, there'd be a deviation from 50-50 with regards to who was the most agreeable individual. But at least, now let's see if I can get this right. I probably can't, because I don't remember exactly the effect size. It's probably about 0.2. Maybe it'd be 60% probability that you draw out a woman who was as more agreeable, and 40% probability that you draw out a man, you know, as a deviation from 50-50. So there's lots of women who are more disagreeable than men, and there are lots of men who are more agreeable than the typical woman. But there are differences, and one of the things that's really worth noting when you look at a normal distribution, because this is where things get weird. So you could say, there's not that much difference on average between men and women, but the thing is, the average is often not the relevant issue. The relevant issue is often the extreme. So for example, if you're going to imprison people, so look at that red curve. What you see is that if you, although it's not drawn exactly perfectly, but what you would see if the curve was proper here, is that once you were out here, say where you were only interested in the 1 out of 50 most disagreeable person, all those people would be men. And that's why, partly why, almost everybody in prison is male. So because you don't put people in prison unless they're very extreme. And one of the things criminals tend to be extreme in is they're low in agreeableness. Surprise, surprise. They're kind of callous. They're in it for themselves. You know, they're stubborn. They don't care about you one way or another. And if they're low in agreeableness and in conscientiousness, then they don't care about you and they aren't going to play by the rules. That's starting to touch on psychopathy. So you can model psychopathy pretty well with the big five. Low agreeableness, low conscientiousness. So then you get someone who could care less about you, who lies all the time, or who doesn't follow the rules, who won't work. So they have a parasitical lifestyle, which is actually one of the dimensions of psychopathy, a parasitical lifestyle. And yeah, and then if you look over on the other direction and you took the 1 in 50 person who was the most compassionate, then that would be, virtually all those people would be women.